All right, good evening, everyone. And if you're joining us from Massachusetts, I hope you're okay in the storm. It's rather windy and rainy out here in Boston right now. So today we have the final entry in our local and family history series, where we have a guest speaker here, Julia Williams from the Leventhal Map Center, talking about historic maps in genealogy research. But before we get going with that, we have a couple of things to start with. First of all, we acknowledge that the Boston Public Library's Central Library stands on land that was once a water-based ecosystem providing sustenance for the indigenous Massachusetts people, and is a place which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among nations. We are committed to land acknowledgements for all locations at which we operate. We reaffirm this commitment to set the context for our planning. Deliberations and public engagement will take place from the spirit of welcome and respect found in our motto, free to all. The chat box is open. If you want to say hi and tell us where you're joining us from, please feel free to. All chat messages during the presentation and the Q&A period afterwards should be related to the topic of the presentation, and this includes all questions, comments, and any related resources you may want to share. I also ask that you please be respectful of me, our guest speaker, and all of the other attendees. I will do my best to make sure that we can get to all of your questions during the Q&A period, and then we will have a little bit of an interactive portion at some point, so we'll do our best to get through all of those. But if we don't get to your question before the program is over, you can feel free to contact me afterwards. This program is being recorded. I will be sending an email, a follow-up email to everyone tomorrow with a link to the handout and a copy of the slides, and as well as the chat transcript. So if there's anything in the chat, you don't need to worry if you missed anything. I'm also going to pop in a link to the handout in the chat right now for those of you who didn't get a chance to download it. Here we go. All right. So now So as I said, our guest speaker today is Julia Williams. She is the Gallery and Communications Coordinator at the Leventhal Map and Education Center. She has experience working with the New England Historic Genealogical Society as a genealogist on the 10 Million Names project which is aimed at recovering the names of the estimated 10 million men, women, and children of African descent who were enslaved in pre- and post-colonial America. In her work at the Leventhal Center, she highlights the way local community-centered information can strengthen our knowledge, perception, and understanding of different historic material. She earned both her master's in museum and education and her bachelor's in education and human development at Tufts University. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Julia.
All right. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. So we are here to learn about how to use historic maps and genealogical research. Primarily, we'll be focusing on fire insurance maps, historic fire insurance maps. But if you have questions on other sorts of maps, we can save those for the end. I'll also say I have two different screens on, so if I'm looking a different direction, it's because I'm looking at my presentation on the other screen. All right. So first I want to give a little bit of background about where I work, the Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library. We are technically a separate nonprofit who is partnered with the Boston Public Library. We have a collection of over 250,000 maps. Of that, about 5,000 are atlases, which is what we'll be looking at today. Most of that is in physical, like printed maps, but we do have some maps that are digitally based only. We also have a physical exhibition space here at the Central Library in downtown Boston. That has a series of rotating exhibits as well as one permanent exhibit all about the history of Boston as a physical place. We also feature educational programming, community events. We have a significant collection of digital objects, and we also have Atlascope, which is the tool we'll be talking about today. I also want to dive a little bit more into the current exhibitions we have on display in the library. So as you can see from these pictures, our most recent exhibit is called Processing Place. And that is all centered around how computers have entered into the professional field of cartography. And it spans from about the 1960s through the 1990s and really details how computers have influenced the field of cartography, as well as showing some physical objects that were used during that transition. A bit more about our digital collections as well, is we have more than just the atlases we'll be covering today. Our digitized collection is over 10,000 maps. Of those, all of them are available at high resolution, so you can download any of those, and you could keep them for themselves. You could print a one-off for your home. You're able to zoom in very high detail, so you can get really, really, really clear images, sometimes even better than if you were in person and you're having difficulty looking at something. Along with the Leventhal Center's collection, we also have Digital Commonwealth, which is through the Boston Public Library. It is similar to our collection, but it's mostly of photos and documents, but they're all of that same really high resolution imaging. So you can again go very into detail, zoom ins. This will be helpful later on because some of those documents or images are also geographically tagged. So I'll show you an example in Atlascope when we move to that portion. But Digital Commonwealth is also a very handy tool. Okay, so getting into what we'll be speaking about today is Atlascope, which was a tool developed by the Leventhal Center. In essence, it is a platform that layers these historic fire insurance maps with a modern day like web-based map, like a Google map, in order to compare and contrast the past and present as seen through documented city geography. So you can see kind of from the example on screen, I'm going through different layers, looking at the different fire insurance maps, and kind of comparing that to the web-based map on the borders. So currently we have about 130 atlases of the greater Boston area. Of that, many of them are of the same area. So this section of Boston, in my example, has 18 different atlases for that specific area. Some towns only have 1 or 2 atlases. So it really depends on which town we're looking at to see how many atlases are available. For each atlas layer, each kind of year that's added on, takes up hundreds of hours of staff labor. We have our internal staff. We also have interns working on Atlascope layers every semester, and we're always trying to add new towns and expand the number of atlases each town also has. So getting into how we make these maps, and this will also be important for those that are not Boston based, and maybe how you can go about finding these atlases in your own communities. So Atlascope is based off of these historical atlases. So they were originally created to be fire insurance maps, which we'll see evidence of when we go further into them. But they were released every like 7 to 10 years and are most common in urban centers as a threat of fire and the frequency of new buildings coming up, old buildings coming down, and different people moving to different estates was more frequent in city centers. So that's again why Boston has such a high rate of atlases in the area versus if we were to go to Beverly or Wellesley or one of the more suburban areas around us. Each atlas is about 2 to 2.5 feet long by about 1.5 feet wide. So they're very physically large in order to accommodate the amount of information that's really being squeezed into these maps. So some of that information is the name of the building owner, square footage of each lot, a home number for the street, the number of floors, the building material. So a lot of information is being recorded for every single building on every single street of each city. And they were created using some standardized survey methods, and then they were later hand colored after they were printed. And the different colors also mean different things and symbolize different building materials. So we'll see some of that as well. So this is some pictures of what the atlases look like. I hope you can get a sense of scale, but they're very large. See, this video can show us a better sense of scale. All right, so thinking about the amount of work that goes into just each page of that, it's quite impressive to have these coming out, pretty regularly in order for us to really compare these changes. Another interesting thing to note is that this is pretty much why this tool, Atlascope, was created, because in order to really compare and contrast different times of these atlases being published, you would have to pull out these giant books, find the different plates or different pages where the same area is being depicted, and then kind of go back and forth between these giant books, which can be pretty hard if you're not totally sure where you are in the area, if you're not oriented correctly. So that is kind of the problem that Atlascope is looking to fix. In order to fix that, the Atlascope or the atlases first need to be digitized. So those huge books get laid out on this infrastructure. They lay out on this table, and then there's a very high resolution camera up here that takes incredibly detailed photos. That is what is looked at in the Atlascope. And if you are also to go to our collection, the Leventhal Map and Education Center digital collection, those are the same images that you'll see on there as well. All right. And then after the maps have been digitized, they then go through this process of georeferencing. So georeferencing uses another digital tool called All Maps. And that basically takes these historic plates, and maps them onto more of a web-based map that we're used to now. So in order to do this, staff have to manually go in and find kind of stable and recognizable points. So here they chose the edge of this street, where the street meets the river, and then this point in the Fresh Pond Lake. And then after they do that, they do the same thing to the web-based map, and then the program All Maps will line those points up together. And this has to be done for every single atlas plate, which is essentially every single page of the atlas. This has to be done for. So depending on the size of the city, the size of the area, there are 30 to 50 plates, or as small as 1 or 2 if it's a really small town. All right, now I'm going to get into my small demo of how we will use Atlascope. Okay, so right now we're in Cambridge. We're going to be looking at this family specifically. All right, so we're looking at, this is an abbreviation, which I'll bring up later, but abbreviation is heirs of Rose E. Corkery. And this atlas is from 1903. I'll say that the different colors, I see someone is asking, the different colors indicate different building materials. So this sort of yellow, and these are pretty standard across at least most Massachusetts fire insurance atlases. I can't say for other parts of the country, but at least in Massachusetts, this is quite stable. The yellow is like a wood frame house or wood frame building. This pink that you'll see is brick. This blue usually indicates like an iron or steel construction. And then you'll sometimes see, trying to see if I can find any, you'll sometimes see a brown outline, like a darker brown. That would be a stone or stone facade. And this green usually indicates parks or green space. Some other details also on here. You can see at the very edge of these streets, different numbers. Those are the house numbers for each home. And then the larger numbers inside of each box are saying the plot size or home size. And then, so we're at 1903 right now. When I click into these atlases, it shows me what year they are. This different name right after the year says who made the map. So there's different atlas makers. Bromley is a very common one. Sanborn is also pretty common. You'll hear those two a lot. And Hopkins is another local fire insurance maker. We're gonna go to 1916. And we'll see that the person that owned that initial plot has now changed to a Catherine Corkery. If we remember before, it was the heirs of Ruth Corky. And now it is this person, Catherine, who we can assume is related based on the last name. And if we go again to 1930, we'll see that it remains with Catherine Corkery. So just now we've gone through about 30 years of history within Cambridge, and we're able to target this family and say, oh, they've remained in this area for a long time, have owned the same plot of land for this long, and have not even divided the plot, which you can see other people have also done. I'll scoot down here and we'll see kind of an opposite story. So I just brought us back to 1894, and here we'll see the heirs of Charles T. Seavey. In these maps, you'll often see a lot of abbreviations because again, they're writing very small for each plot and are usually trying to squeeze a lot into each little piece. So if you are unsure of different names of people you're looking for, that may be a little difficult because their full name might not be written out. So it's helpful to know the full names of people you're looking for and some slight possible misspellings if they are misspelled, or different ways the name could be shortened so that you know you're looking for the right person. So similar to the family before, this little plot of land stays with the same heirs or the same people. But here we can see that they actually sold their plot to the city of Cambridge, and that's changed. So in this way, we're able to concretely say between 1894 and at least through 1903, this Seavey family had stayed in this area. And then between at least 1903 and 1916, they left. That is really important information because thankfully most of these atlases are coming out kind of between each like decade, between like 1900 to 1910, which is information you can get from the census. So when we have this information, if we already have kind of an area that we think our ancestors may have lived, we can go to where we believe that area to be and check on these atlases if they were actually there between the dates of the census records that are available. So that is a really helpful tool. Okay, at this time, I'll take some general questions and then we can kind of move into, I will actually search atlases if anyone has anything to look at.
Okay, so Priscilla had actually asked if the maps were hand colored.
Yes, so they are hand colored. These were all produced really from about the mid 1800s to about the mid 1900s. So at that time, really no machine is able to do this. And because of the specificity of each sheet, there was no machines, advanced enough to do this kind of work. So each one had to be hand done by people.
Interesting. Okay, so Priscilla is also asking, and I'm pretty sure I know the answer for this, is there an index of names or street names?
So there is not, at least not ones associated with these exact atlases. I'll bring this up a little later in this presentation too, but there are different city directories that are available. So Boston, I know, has many city directories dating back to the very beginning of the 20th
Yes,
century.
we do. We
And
actually have them going back to 1790.
okay, so look at that. Boston has many, many,
So,
many.
so for that, I would say send us an email to ask@bpl.org and we can help you try to figure that out.
Yeah, but these individual fire insurance atlases will not have indexes of streets.
Right.
The most specificity you may get is like different portions of the city, is you'll see them kind of boxed out in each area, which were those original atlas plates or those original pages that had to be scanned. But that's about as specific as they get um, in terms of structure.
And Barbara's asking, I found a deed on my brownstone from 1858 and the streets had different names. Would I be able to research this on your awesome tool?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this tool only uses modern addresses. So if you had a historic address, it will not be able to search by that old name. This is also where I'll say that the city directories are again a very helpful tool. Um, Luckily for you, Barbara, it seems you're living in the current house, so you know its current address. And that is how you would look it up here. But those city directories, if you're able to go through and look for those old street names, that's how you'll find that information.
Yes, and that's another one. You can also feel free to send us an email at Research Services and we can help you out with that. Okay, so Sandra is asking, did slaves own any land?
So at the time of these fire insurance atlases, slavery had already been abolished. So no, there were no present day slaves to be owning land. Definitely African Americans did own land in the city, um, but that wouldn't have been something that these atlases would have noted.
Okay. Okay, so we have a request to check an address. Kathleen is asking for 180 Chelsea Street in Charlestown from 1888 to 1919.
Chelsea Street, you said?
Yes, Chelsea Street. Yes. Oh, there we go.
Okay, so there's 10 atlases at this location. I'll kind of walk us through. So in order to search, I'll say this first, we are in this controls tab, this first tab, and then search places right here. And then this is the spot we're looking at with this little target. So it looks like it starts as a boiler house in 1875. You'll see that there are some older atlases available, but these percentages show how much of this area is covered by the atlas. So this one shows 66% coverage. So that area does get cropped out. So it's important to look at these percentages on the outside. This is that same location in 1882. And again, there's those colors. So this is brick. These are some brownstones. And we'll jump ahead to 1892. Again, it looks just like the same buildings. That's 1901. We see the addition of something. 1912. And then the last historic atlas we have is 1922, where it looks like those buildings that had been there for a while have now been taken down. So we, on Atlascope at least, only has through about 1930 our very latest atlases. We may have some more going further in time in our digital collection, but because of copyright things, we're not allowed to have them in our tool. So it is always useful to check in our digital collection to see if we have more atlases in each area.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so Penny is asking, does Atlascope cover only the Boston area, or are there other parts of Massachusetts and New England?
So it's mostly the Boston area. There are a few sort of scattered towns around Massachusetts. We can look at what's covered actually in this opening page. And this will kind of go through each town that we have. You can always check too if you search up any address. If it's not available, Atlascope will just say it's not available. But yeah, we currently are just really doing the Boston area.
Okay, so I have a couple people asking for our email address again. I just put that in the chat. I will put that in the chat for everyone. It is, if you need help figuring out street changes and everything like that, you'd send an email to ask@bpl.org. That's the BPL's main email. Okay, let's see. So Catherine is asking, how can I find out if a tool like this exists for New York City or for Raleigh, North Carolina?
At this current time, I believe this is the only tool kind of this nature. That's not to be said that there aren't fire insurance atlases available. I'm positive New York City has fire insurance atlases, probably many more than we have in Boston, to be honest. But you would just have to individually go into each atlas and compare kind of each location. So that's the only thing. Yeah, I don't know the same about Raleigh, North Carolina, but good places to check for fire insurance atlases are always the local library. City halls also may have it. And then I would also check the local historical society to see if they have that atlas as well.
Excellent. All right. So Anne is asking, how would you recommend creating a digital image from these maps and exporting it to a document?
Yeah, so the best way is if you know which map you want, we'll use this one as an example. Say I want to kind of do this area. Oh, this is a good thing to point out too. Is like I was saying before, how Atlascope can't search historic addresses. This is actually showing where some new streets are being planned. So if we look on the side over here, we can see that Walford Way coming in the same place that this was planned, which is pretty cool. I always like to see that in these historic maps. But if I actually wanted to print this, if I go down to research, like, let me check. If I go down to bibliographic information, it'll say what atlas I'm actually looking at. And then I can go to the catalog record and that will pull up those really high res images I was talking about earlier. And I'll go to click in. This is where it'll show those initial plates of each spot. And if I know where I'm looking, I can go in and download this image. And that's how you would then go about like blowing it up or doing whatever it is you'd like to do with the image. I also noticed in each atlas, we'll see some street indexes. So not every atlas will have this, and you'll have to know which address or which atlas you'd like to search for. But occasionally there are some street indexes for each atlas.
Right. So Justin has a related question. He's asking, how do I download from that screen? I've tried and can see no download button.
Yeah, so let me go back. So you can either do a classic like print, and I'm not sure if this will load, but if you go up into your kind of three dots at the side of your computer and hit print, that will typically print what is ever on your screen. You can also take screenshots. There's also, let me back kind of here, and it's called a triple IF manifest. That is kind of the most information it will give you about the image in order to download it. And there are different like converters online where if you copy the link to the manifest, it will show the image in its full resolution and you can download from there.
Right. Okay. So Bettina is asking, what are the sources for information for the property descriptions on the maps?
For the property descriptions. So I said earlier they would use kind of standard surveying methods. So oftentimes this was somebody either walking around, pulling historic information. Also, when you're building all of these houses, you have to submit a lot of information about what's actually being built. So they would pull from those documents as well. Um, yeah.
Okay, let's see. So, okay. So Mary Alice is asking, I'm looking at my street in Roslindale and there's a map from 1924 and then nothing again from until 2021. Are there any maps I could check for years in between?
Yeah, so we can check on our digital collection. So our digital collection you can find just by going to leventhalmap.org. And then from there, you would search in our digital collection, Roslindale. I hope I spelled that right. And then from here, we can see what we got. So I can sort by date over here. So if we're trying to look after 1924, I'll put that in. And it looks like in our collection, at least, 1924 is the latest atlas we have. Again, it's possible that there may be other atlases, but at least digitally available, that's the only one that we have. You can search our entire collection if you're like living close by, and you could possibly come in for like an in-person visit. But at least what's available digitally and on Atlascope, it looks like this one, 1924, is the latest we have.
Okay, so I have another request for an address. So Jim is asking for Webster Court. So they say their great grandfather lived there in 1864. Today, Webster Street ends at 40 Webster, and they want to see where Webster would be today.
Yeah,
So
and what town is that in?
East Boston.
Webster Avenue.
Yeah, it's like we have Webster Avenue and Webster Street. There doesn't seem to be a Webster Court. Okay, so so Jim, I'm just going to ask that you send us an email to ask@bpl.org, and then just with as much information as you have, and we'll see if we can help you out with that. Okay. So Catherine's asking, was Atlascope software for the overlays developed at, I think they meant to say BPL, or does it exist for use by other libraries?
So it was created by the staff at the Leventhal Map and Education Center. So at this current moment, I believe it's only being used by us. Though I do think there is a lot of internal interest about expanding Atlascope to other areas. That said, it does depend on the capacity of other institutions and what atlases they have available, what like digital tools they're able to create and manage. Because like I said earlier, it does take a lot of work to make each of these atlases, to have each street line up exactly with each other takes a lot of intensive, detailed work. But if any other libraries, if you know of any that would like to use this tool, please let me know. I'll share my email.
Excellent. Well, hopefully we can do that somehow.
Hmm.
All right, so Judith is asking, can Atlascope be accessed from my home computer?
Yes, it can. So it's just a general website. So it was in the handout that Jesse sent earlier, but it's just atlascope.org.
All right, so I just put a link in the chat to everyone for that. Okay, so Leslie is asking, have you used Google Earth or other sites / tools to layer georeferenced maps on contemporary maps?
Yeah, so one of the things we can look at, we have that web-based map here. We also can look at some aerial imagery, which is quite jarring sometimes. But this is right around the Boston Public Library. And we can scroll through and see what's happening. You can also flip these two, so you can have the historic atlas on the outside and the inside view, the interior. This one. And you can scroll through this way. This way, I think, is really helpful for seeing some broader community changes. So, like in the Back Bay, here are these huge railroad depots, and you can see how the Prudential Center kind of sits right on top of all of those old railroad lines, which is pretty cool.
Let's see. Yeah, I like poking around there just for fun sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's see. So Priscilla's asking if you have in here an 1838 map of Jamaica Plain.
I would say 1838 is probably too far back for these kinds of atlases. That said, we do have maps of that area in general. But at least in terms of fire insurance atlases, you're really looking at least in the Boston area, about 1860, 1865 to about 1930.
Okay. And so Pamela's, I have another one. Pamela's asking about Seneca Street in the South End neighborhood.
And how do they spell Seneca?
Let's see, Seneca.
In Boston, you said.
That's, yes, the South End.
I'm not having it come up here. Is that a historic atlas? I mean, a historic address.
Seneca. Oh, yeah, it's, oh, you got the N and the C flipped there. It's Seneca. Okay, yeah, they still don't have it. Okay, so, all right, Pamela, we're not really seeing that in there. All right, so, okay. So Kathleen says, so it was the one that asked about 180 Chelsea Street. She says, I found 180 Chelsea Street in Charlestown. It was actually across the street from what Atlascope found and down the block a little. The street is different because the even and odd numbers are on the same side. Oh, wow.
Mhm.
Interesting.
That's very
So
interesting.
yeah, you don't see that too much.
Yeah.
And she says the person she was looking for was H.O. Sullivan, the person she was looking for. So I guess that one was Very interesting.
Yeah, already flexing your Atlascope skills.
All right, so I think we kind of covered this already. Jan is asking about Washington Street in the North End in 1855. I think you just said you don't really have anything for that far back.
Yeah, I would say we probably do not. But again, we can always check and scoot over there. So you can zoom out pretty far on these. I kind of demonstrate that. So we can hop over to the north end. Yeah, the furthest we have back here is 1861, but that is really the limit to Atlascope.
Okay. All right. Okay, so Kathleen again on Chelsea Street. She says she thinks the street is on the waterfront across from the shipyard.
Oh, okay, gotcha. I'll take this time too now. I'm reading this comment by Janie Williams, I believe her name. Is that Google Maps has a historical overlay for some areas. Google Maps will also sometimes have the historic street address. So if you can't search it on Atlascope, you can try it through Google Maps or Google Earth. And sometimes they will be able to pull up that historic address and show you where it is currently. I don't think it will do that for everyone, but it's always a great source to check.
Okay. So we have a comment from MZ saying Seneca Street is no more. So that's why you weren't able to find it in there because it doesn't exist anymore.
Okay.
So that's another case where you can send us an email to ask@bpl.org and we can help you see if we can help you figure out where it is or was. Okay, so related to all the house numbers being on one side, Kathleen says, I think that's why all the numbers are on one side, all the houses are on one side.
Yes, that's good.
Okay, and let me see here. Okay, so Bettina has a comment that I think is interesting. What is important is that atlases reflect what is seen. Maps sometimes rely on information given them, often what is intended for an area, but not yet done, and sometimes never implemented. I think that's a pretty good point.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see. So I did put up a link to the handout in there for anyone who got here a little late. So Pamela is saying she found Seneca Street on the map at the BPL. That's interesting. Okay.
That's
So,
that's
okay.
also reminding me. I want to show off kind of two other cool things about Atlascope. In this research tab, you can do search more maps here and search photographs here. So more maps here, say if you hadn't found Seneca Street, Pamela, but you knew kind of the sort of general area, you could go in, press search maps here, and that will show you all of the maps that are geotagged to that location, meaning that in theory, they cover that location as a map. Some are more detailed than others. So this one is showing the entire United States. That's not going to be so helpful for you, but you can narrow it down with these filters over here. So I can go to Boston and it'll show me ones strictly of Boston. And it's possible through this kind, you'll be able to find that historic address. Also show search photographs here, does the same thing, but with Digital Commonwealth. That's the tool I mentioned earlier. And in here, it will take all of the geotagged photos within this circle and bring them up for us to view. And we can get a little sneak peek into what the neighborhood might have looked like back then. This will also have those high-res images. You're usually able to download them as well, and it'll have all the information. So we can see this image was from 1895, which is really cool. I think I find myself going into the Digital Commonwealth Atlascope kind of rabbit hole a lot quicker.
Okay. Okay, so MC has just pointed out, so the Seneca Street that I think we're looking for was one of the New York streets, which was basically bulldozed in a redevelopment project. So that's why that one's not there anymore. And it would show up in maps prior to the 1950s is when that neighborhood was demolished. So that's probably where it was seen before. It was in an earlier map. Thank you for reminding me about that. Yes, Seneca Street was, for those of you who aren't familiar, there was a group of streets called the New York Streets in the South End that were named after cities along the Erie Canal. And the whole neighborhood was essentially demolished due to urban development in the 1950s. If you're familiar with the ink block, that's about where they all were. So for anyone who was not familiar with that story. Okay. Okay, so let's see. So we have another address request. So Barb is asking to check out 40 Glencoe Street in Brighton. She says her family owned the house there from about 1925 to 2018. So that's Glencoe, Glencoe.
Okay, we have 9 atlases of this area. So this is in 1875. This is also where you can see a lot of like history of each area. So this is all pretty much farmland at this point in time. Looks like this man, George Sparhawk, owned these huge plots and had just started, kind of dividing them up in order to sell. Looks like he lives right there actually, but at this current point in time, there's no buildings on that area. That's about a 10-year jump forward. We can see development is kind of picking up, but still pretty slow. That's 1890, so about 15 years after that first initial atlas. 1899, another 10 years, and you can see development has really picked up. Scoot us in a bit. That's 1909. 1916. And then 1925. So in 1925, there's still no home built, but it looks like it was owned by St. Elk's Hospital.
That I think it's St. Elizabeth's. It's nearby.
Oh, I can't see.
I also live in Brighton, so I know the neighborhood a little.
Oh, perfect. But yeah, at least at the time of this survey, there was no home built on that land yet.
Okay, so and I think I might be able to help with this one. So Leslie is asking, where did you go to look for an historical address?
Yeah, Jesse, if you want to take this one.
Sure. Okay, so there's different approaches you can take. Generally, there's a book that was published in the early 1910s that is as a complete listing of streets in Boston at that time. So that can be useful to track changes before the time period it was published. It's not that helpful for after. But aside from that, there were street listings published fairly frequently in the 20th century. So we would check those. Basically, we would just need to, what I have done in the past is see if I can track down what a street used to be called and then find it on an older map and then kind of work my way forward to figure out where it is now. So there's that's just one approach. There's a few other ways you can try that. It can be a little tricky. So I actually do have, because we get this question a fair amount, I do have a research guide about researching. This is specifically for Boston, but I imagine a lot of this can be helpful if you live elsewhere. I have a guide for researching street and place names because we have gotten a lot of questions from folks who are researching their ancestry saying they have this address, but they can't find it. So they need help finding it. So there's a few different resources we can try. And as always, you can feel free to send us an email. Okay.
All right, so we can do probably one more
Okay.
thing to look up and then we'll.
Oh, okay. So there was some confusion there. So Leslie said she thought that you had gone to a site and looked for an historical address, but yes, but maybe you were just looking for maps from a particular time period. Yes. So Julia isn't looking up historical addresses right now. People have been giving her addresses that they have that they want to try to see on the map now. That's what we've been doing. If, like I said, finding an address can be a little tricky. So I think so there was a little bit of confusion there.
Yeah, and then when I changed sites, that brought us over to the Leventhal digital collection, where we were looking at those historic maps to try to find some historic addresses in
Okay.
those.
So Brew is asking for something from 1950 on, as we've kind of discussed already. They don't really have anything in Atlascope that recent, and that is recent in genealogical terms. So we've kind of covered that. So we do have, okay, so Edward's asking, oh, sorry. Edward's asking for 61 Rogers Avenue in Somerville. I'm not sure how much coverage we have for Somerville.
Perfect. We have two atlases for Somerville. So scooting out a bit. Looks like in 1874, this area was all owned by the Tufts Brick Manufacturing Company. And then the other atlas we have is from 1895. And we can see that whole area was sold and then subdivided into all of these lots. It looks like all of this development hasn't quite reached this area of Somerville yet. So we can see this huge empty area of just lots kind of waiting for people to build. But those are the only atlases we currently have available for Somerville.
Okay. So we have some non-address related questions coming up.
Okay, and then I'm gonna head back to my presentation.
Okay, so we will cover all of that when Julia is done with her presentation.
Okay, here we go. So I'll quickly go through the rest of this stuff. So some things to remember about these fire insurance maps is that only property owners are going to be listed on these. So if you had family that were renters, they will not appear. Other family members other than property owner will also not appear. That's why it's really important to compare these two census records so that you're able to really confirm if somebody may have been inhabiting that space. That's also where you can check if they were a different member of the family, is you can say, oh, the property owner matches maybe the head of house in this census. As we said before, Atlascope cannot search historic atlases. You also can't search by name of like the individuals that lived in these places. It will only search modern atlases. This is the same guide that Jesse just dropped in the chat for Boston area historic addresses. These also exist for other cities across the United States. A little less frequently for smaller towns, but they are definitely available. Atlascope is also pretty limited to the Boston area, but these fire insurance atlases have been developed for many, many cities across the US. And like I said, you can check either local libraries, city halls, or local historical societies may have some of these atlases available. Some of the names, as you saw, may be shortened or have small misspellings. These were humans making these maps, right? So sometimes they don't get every single thing correct. So if there is a small misspelling, that could be something to note. I would say not to get too thrown by misspellings if you know for a fact that this person was in the area, and you can go based off of census data, city directories, or like personal family knowledge. If the name is very different, I would say that it is probably correct and that you should kind of look into where that difference is happening. One of the abbreviations of note, I want to say, is this HRS means heirs. So you'll see that quite often, is you'll see the heirs of X, Y, and Z name. Another thing not based on Atlascope is that census data will typically not provide a full address for each household. Usually, a census record will have the general town. It will maybe be divided up into wards, you'll see sometimes, but those aren't always specified. So the census can get you pretty close, but it might not get you all the way to street level detail about where someone is living. For research support, the best way is to email askbpl.org, or there's also a general form that you could fill out if you don't want to email for any research questions or guidance. This is for either the Boston Public Library or the Leventhal Center. It'll go through the same ask, the same prompts, and this will help us prepare for you either to come in person or if we need to do some behind the scenes research to be able to answer your question. If you're coming in person, we also ask that you submit your request at least 3 days in advance. Usually as soon as you know you'd like to come in, if you can send in a request, that's always helpful. That allows us to go through our collection, through our 250,000 maps, and find exactly what you need to find for us to pull. I also want to take the time to say a bit about our newsletter. If you're interested in other events that the Leventhal Center may be hosting, or different things that we have going on, we write articles, we speak about the exhibitions that we have going on in the gallery. Please sign up for our newsletter, where you'll be able to learn all about what's going on. About every 2 weeks, we send out the newsletter. And there's a QR code, and then you can also go onto our site and join the newsletter. All right, that is the end for me. I'll see if there are any small things I can answer.
Sorry, camera's being weird. Okay, there we go. So Dan has a question. Are there any copyright issues in using these map images in research or client reports for genealogy?
For research, I would say not at all. For client work, unless you're planning on publishing, I would also say no. That being said, if you have like real concerns about licensing or producing different things, you can send that question as well to Ask BPL, and the cataloging librarians who are much more well versed in that can help you.
All right, so okay, so this is one I can answer. So Beverly is asking, are there any records about the naming of new streets and planning the space? So again, as far as Boston goes, Boston has never kept any kind of record about the origins of street names. That's why I put together that guide I linked to earlier, because we get asked that a fair amount. So no, there really are no records. for at least for Boston, about why streets are named the way they are. As far as planning for redevelopment projects, there will be a fair amount of information, particularly the more recent ones. So in the 1950s and 60s, there will be a lot of information about that. And it really depends on the time period or if it's a major project. We do have some resources. So I think one of them is be the annual report for the street laying out department. That might have information in it, but really it kind of depends on when and when the street was laid out and where it was laid out. Like I said, if you check out that guide I linked to a little while ago, that'll give you some tips on how to research that information. Okay, let's see.
I think that may be it.
It looks like it. So lots of very kind words. Okay, great. So, great. Well, thank you, Julia, for a wonderful presentation and the demonstration of Atlascope. I know I keep trying to promote this to folks who are doing this kind of research. So I also really appreciate that. And it looks like a lot of other people did too. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me. I really had a fun time doing this.
Good. It's great. And thank you everyone who attended. You had lots of really great questions. If you think of something later, again, you can email me. You can email ask@bpl.org. You can email the Leventhal Map Center. And I also want to thank everyone generally for attending our events this fall. This will be the last Local and Family History Series lecture of the fall. We will be coming back next year. We're still working on finalizing the schedule. So keep an eye on the BPL's website for further updates, and you'll be getting, just another reminder, everyone will be getting an email tomorrow with a link to the handout, the chat transcript, and Julia's slides. So if you missed anything, you don't need to worry. This is also recorded. So everyone will get a link to the recording once it is ready. So that's all we have. So once again, thank you, Julia, and thank you everyone for attending. And I hope everyone is staying dry tonight if you live in Boston.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.